Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about maybe vaccines and then pharmaceutical companies. I mean, you talked about kind of this classic relationship we have with doctors where you go to the doctor and they fix you. You know, that's unfortunately, and you probably know this from being in medicine, it's kind of backed up 10x by the pharmaceutical companies. I had Dr. Michael Greger on a couple weeks ago, famous doctor, who advocates, plant-based diets because the numbers tell him it's the right thing to do. But he said, Brian, the best thing that a doctor does is a blood pressure test because they adjust a statin, 10 minutes, the patient's in and out. Everybody makes money, including the BMW dealership down the road. The doctor makes money. There's not necessarily any conspiracy going on. It's just it works for everyone. And the patient seems like they're happy. Oh, you fixed me. You did something good for me. And this whole industry just keeps going, and it's almost got a mind of its own. And it's almost like a living organism that wants to live and grow and get bigger, and it stops anything kind of in its path, which is probably why I can't talk about vaccines on, mainstream media or even social media platforms. So you got that running, and then now you've got the potential of a vaccine, which again brings these companies in there as well. Maybe speak a little bit on that pharmaceutical industry and how it affects the whole relationship we have with doctors. And then I'd love to get in and talk about the whole concept of a vaccine and what's right about it and what's wrong about it.
Yeah, so the industry is certainly a machine, and what you just described, you could have easily just been standing in front of a medical school class describing cancer. It is a machine that is self-proliferating, self-serving, and self-reinforcing. And so there's nothing within the growth of the machine that can slow itself down. And so it is a perpetual motion machine that takes more and more energy to drive it, and it can't produce its own energy, so it has to extract it from the environment around it. That's how a cancer grows. And so the medical system, and I would argue the prison system, and I would argue the military, industrial complex, all have the same problem in that they are chasing symptoms of a collapsing society in those cases, and constantly winning the game because they make more money for those that are running the system. And so it is not a conspiracy theory at all. It is capitalism at its best work, really. But it goes deeper than capitalism. It's humanism. The humanism, philosophy that we live is that we are in conflict with everything around us, and we need to kill everything else so that there's more room for us. And in that now, with just what we've talked about over the last few minutes altogether, you start to realize we are in all of those systems destroying biodiversity. And so we can destroy biodiversity in human societies. We can destroy biodiversity within microbial systems. And in so doing, in the monocropping type behavior of humans, as we plant just corn and soybean and wheat across 10 million acres of farmland, more every year, we are undermining what biology and life is really intended to do, which is to do biodiversity. And so we are not only have a machine, that machine is a machine of simplification. It's always trying to get to simpler and simpler algorithms to produce, a disease modification so that it fits everybody. And what you mentioned earlier that, we saw that one of the main likelihoods of mortality from what we were calling corona deaths was not coronavirus at all. It was actually comorbidities of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and kidney disease, which none of those three have anything to do with the physiology of the virus per se. And so it was begging the question of, well, why are those three populations the ones? Why isn't it the patients that have chronic asthma, emphysema, and all of that are the top ones there? Why isn't it the lung patients that are so at risk for this respiratory virus, as it's been called? And as it turns out, those three categories of patients have to be put on the same two drugs. And so, as I was saying earlier, the machine is trying to find simpler and simpler algorithms so that the complexity of a day of a physician can be executed quickly. So you need a doctor to come in and see do pattern recognition and then immediately say, these are the two drugs you need. And in the very extraordinarily complex disease pathophysiologies of cardiovascular, cerebrovascular disease, diabetes in the liver, and kidney disease, All three of those have now been boiled down to a clinical algorithm that you just have to put them on a statin drug and an ACE inhibitor blood pressure medicine, and you've won the game as a physician. You can check those two boxes and say, I just practice the standard of care for any of those. Now you're talking about nearly 1 billion patients worldwide with one of those three conditions. And so we've boiled those three conditions globally down to 2 medications, and those 2 medications pertinently change the terrain of our lungs to overexpress the receptor for coronavirus. And so we have changed the terrain, we have changed the physiology of humanity through this narrow, blinders on perspective, this reductionist, belief system that pharmacy is going to fix everything. And in so doing, we made the whole population prone to a disease, event that actually had very little to do with the virus at the beginning. And it had to do with a change in the terrain, just as the weed is not the thing that comes and attacks the farm. The farm is failing, the soil is failing, and therefore the weed shows up. Corona is a natural part of our micro ecosystem's communication network, okay? So microbiome, bacteria, fungi, all of these are communicating. Corona is there as a communication network. As if it starts to develop an abnormal relationship with our terrain, it's because we've modified ourselves. And nowhere is that more obvious in this pandemic than those 2 drugs of the statins and the ACE inhibitors.